1941. The United States Army is preparing for a war it knows is coming. Factories are running, soldiers are training, and somewhere inside the ordnance offices of the War Department, a problem is quietly getting worse. The standard infantry rifle, the M1 Garand, is a masterpiece. Heavy, powerful, accurate. But the men who need it most cannot carry it. Clerks, radiomen, mortar crews, artillery teams, officers leading a charge. These are not frontline riflemen, but they still get shot at. The weapons they carry, old pistols, outdated submachine guns, are not enough. What the army needs is something between a pistol and a rifle. Something light enough to carry all day. Something that gives a soldier who is not a rifleman a real chance of surviving contact with the enemy. What they get is the M1 Carbine, a weapon weighing just over 5 pounds, shorter than a standard rifle, lighter than almost anything else in the American arsenal, and by the time the war ends, the most produced American firearm of the entire conflict. Military planners expected it to serve a limited, secondary role and then fade away. Instead, it outlasted the rifles it was built beside. It fought in Korea, it fought in Vietnam, it armed militaries on 6 continents, and it is still carried today. This is the story of how a small, simple, deliberately modest weapon refused to be replaced, and why the soldiers who carried it never wanted to give it up. To understand what the M1 Carbine he was fighting in South was built to solve, you have to understand what the American military was carrying into the Second World War, and who was carrying it. The M1 Garand was one of the finest battle rifles of its era. Semi-automatic, accurate at distance, and dependable under fire. General George Patton famously called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. That was not an empty compliment. The Garand gave the American infantryman a serious edge over bolt-action opponents. But the Garand weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded. With a full kit, a soldier was already carrying enormous weight across rough terrain. For a frontline rifleman, that weight was worth it. For everyone else, it was a problem. The US Army in the late 1930s had begun studying how modern warfare was actually being fought. And what they found was significant. A large portion of the men in any combat unit were not primary riflemen. They were radio operators, heavy weapons crews, engineers, drivers, medics, officers, support personnel. These men needed something to defend themselves in close contact. But the full infantry rifle was too heavy, too long, and too cumbersome for men already burdened with specialized equipment. The pistol was the standard alternative. But pistols are short-range, low-accuracy tools, useful in only the most immediate encounters. The M19 11.45 caliber pistol was reliable and powerful, but it required significant training to use well under stress. At anything beyond 10 or 15 meters, it was a poor defensive option against an enemy with a rifle. The gap between the pistol and the rifle was real, and in modern combat, that gap was getting soldiers killed. The army needed a solution. Not a full rifle, not a pistol. Something lighter, handier, and more accurate than either option, purpose-built for men who fought as a secondary role, not a primary one. That requirement would eventually produce one of the most debated, most loved, and most enduring weapons in American military history. The formal requirement that led to the M1 Carbine was issued in 1938. The US Army began looking for what it called a light rifle. The specifications were demanding. The weapon had to weigh no more than 5 pounds. It had to be accurate to at least 300 yards. It had to be semi-automatic. And it had to chamber a cartridge more powerful than a pistol round, but smaller and lighter than a standard rifle cartridge. Developing a new cartridge alongside a new weapon was itself an unusual step. The Army was not just asking for a redesigned pistol or a cut-down rifle. It was asking for something entirely new. Several major American manufacturers entered development. Winchester, Inland, Springfield, and others began submitting designs. The competition was serious. The cartridge that emerged was the .30 carbine round, a rimless intermediate cartridge purpose designed for this weapon. It was longer and more powerful than a pistol round, capable of delivering meaningful energy at short to medium range, but far lighter and lower recoil than the 36 round used in the Garand. Soldiers could carry far more ammunition with far less weight. Winchester submitted the winning rifle design. It was partly derived from a self-loading mechanism that a designer named David Marshall Williams had been developing. Williams had worked on short-stroke gas piston operation, a system that would prove reliable and simple under field conditions. The Winchester design was adopted by the Army in October 1941 as the M1 Carbine. Within weeks of adoption, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. The United States was at war, and the Army needed this weapon in enormous numbers immediately. Production contracts went out to a remarkable range of manufacturers, not just traditional gun makers, but typewriter companies, jukebox manufacturers, and furniture makers. The industrial scale of what followed was extraordinary. By the time production ended in 1945, over 6 million M1 carbines had been produced. It was the single most manufactured American firearm of the Second World War. The thinking behind the M1 carbine was disciplined and specific. This was not a weapon trying to replace the Garand. It was never meant to. The designers and planners understood from the beginning that they were building a different tool for a different job. The philosophy was, give secondary combatants a weapon they will actually carry, actually train with, and actually use. A weapon they do not resent as a burden. A weapon that is always ready when the moment comes. That meant sacrificing range and power. The .30 carbine cartridge was genuinely less capable than the .36 at distance. Nobody pretended otherwise. But for the radio man who gets rushed in a jungle clearing, for the officer leading a street patrol, for the engineer working on a bridge, under fire the question is not whether you can hit something at 500 yards. The question is whether you can stay alive in the next 30 seconds. The design also prioritized simplicity of operation. A support soldier might go days or weeks without firing a shot, then need to react instantly under enormous stress. The M1 carbine needed to be simple enough that a soldier with minimal weapons training could operate it without hesitation. The result was a weapon that felt natural in the hand, pointed intuitively, and required almost no time to bring into action. Low recoil meant faster follow-up shots and less flinching for inexperienced shooters. The shorter barrel and overall length made it easier to handle in vehicles, aircraft, trenches, and tight spaces. The detachable box magazine made reloading straightforward. It was not the most powerful weapon on the battlefield. It was not designed to be. It was designed to be the best possible weapon for the people who could not carry anything heavier. And in that goal, it largely succeeded. The M1 carbine is a gas-operated, semi-automatic carbine. It uses a short-stroke piston gas system, where a small amount of propellant gas is tapped from the barrel to push the piston rearward, cycling the action and loading the next round automatically. The barrel measures 18 inches, significantly shorter than the Garand's 24-inch barrel. Overall length is just over 35 inches. Unloaded weight sits at approximately 5.5 pounds, though production tolerances meant individual rifles varied slightly. The standard magazine held 15 rounds in the original configuration. A 30-round curved magazine was introduced later in the war, primarily for the M1A1 folding stock variant developed for airborne troops. Pause, that folding stock variant deserves its own mention. The M1A1 was designed specifically for paratroopers, who needed a weapon compact enough to be strapped to their body during a parachute drop without interfering with the jump. The metal folding stock allowed the weapon to be collapsed to under 26 inches. It became one of the most distinctive and recognizable variants of the design. The action itself is smooth and relatively simple. The rotating bolt locks reliably under normal conditions. Field stripping, the process of disassembling the weapon for cleaning, is straightforward. Enough that soldiers with minimal training could manage it in poor light and cold weather. What made the technical design impressive was not complexity, it was economy. Every component of the M1 carbine existed for a reason. There was very little waste in the design. Sights on the original version were a simple fixed rear aperture. Adjustable rear sights were introduced on the M1A1 and subsequent variants. The trigger mechanism, while not as refined as a target rifle, was adequate for the defensive ranges at which the weapon was intended to operate. Short pause. The weapon was also designed for mass production from the outset. Tolerances were set to allow a wide range of manufacturers to produce compatible parts. This was not always perfect in execution, but it allowed the extraordinary production numbers that the war demanded. Long pause. The .30 carbine cartridge propels a 110-grain bullet at approximately 1,990 feet per second from the M1 Carbine's 18-inch barrel. That generates around 967 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, significantly more than a pistol round, but considerably less than the .36 cartridge in the Garand, which delivers over 2,600 foot-pounds. At distances up to 150 yards, the M1 Carbine was effective and reliable for the defensive missions it was assigned. Accuracy at that range was good enough for trained shooters to place rounds with precision. The low recoil allowed for quick target requisition. Beyond 300 yards, the ballistic performance drops off sharply. The .30 carbine round loses velocity and energy at a faster rate than a full rifle cartridge. At those distances, the weapon was genuinely outclassed by standard infantry rifles, but the design had other advantages that numbers alone do not capture. A soldier carrying the M1 Carbine could carry roughly twice as much ammunition as a soldier carrying the same weight in 36-round Garand rounds. In jungle fighting, in house-to-house combat, in defensive positions where the enemy is rarely visible beyond 100 meters, that ammunition advantage was real. Rate of fire, though limited to semi-automatic on the standard M1 and M2 configurations, was fast enough to put rounds on target quickly. The M2 carbine variant, introduced toward the end of the war and used extensively in Korea, added selective fire capability, allowing the weapon to fire automatically. At close ranges, in the hands of trained soldiers, the fully automatic M2 was a serious short-range threat. The 15-round standard magazine and the 30-round magazine, available later in the war, gave the carbine meaningful sustained fire potential relative to bolt-action alternatives. For the mission, it was designed for giving secondary combatants a real defensive option. At close and medium range, the M1 Carbine had more than enough capability. The M1 Carbine entered combat almost immediately after American forces entered the war. In the Pacific Theater, where fighting was often in dense jungle, and at close range, the carbine found conditions that played directly to its strengths. American officers leading patrols found the weapon far more practical than the Garand in the close terrain of Pacific Islands. The weapon could be carried constantly without fatigue and brought into action quickly when an ambush broke cover from 10 or 20 meters. In those moments, the difference between a pistol and a carbine was often survival. Paratroopers in both theaters carried the M1A1 variant. During the airborne operations in Sicily in 1943 and in Normandy in June 1944, carbines were among the most common weapons dropped with American parachute units. The folding stock design had proved its value in the jump and in the chaotic close-range fighting that followed. In the European theater, opinions on the carbine were more divided. At longer engagement ranges, typical of open European terrain, soldiers sometimes wished for more power. But in the Huatgun forest, in the rubble of French towns, and in the tight fighting through German villages in 1945, the carbine's compact size and the weapon's most intense and most criticized combat experience came in Korea. American forces encountered Chinese infantry, who often attacked in large numbers at night and at close range. Soldiers reported that the .30 carbine round sometimes failed to reliably stop enemy combatants wearing heavy winter clothing. Whether this was an ammunition failure, a terminal ballistics limitation, or a combination of factors has been debated extensively. What is clear is that the complaints were widespread enough to become part of the weapon's reputation. And yet, despite those complaints, the M1 carbine continued to be used. It continued to be carried. It continued to prove useful in the close-range fluid fighting of the Korean War precisely because nothing lighter was available that could do more. In Vietnam, the carbine appeared again, this time in the hands of South Vietnamese forces, local defense units, and early American advisory personnel. Its lightweight made it practical for smaller-statured soldiers. The 30-round magazine of the M2 variant gave users reasonable firepower at the ranges most common in jungle fighting. The weapon had outlasted its own designed era and was fighting a third major conflict. No honest account of the M1 Carbine ignores its real limitations. The terminal ballistics of the .30 carbine round were a genuine concern. At close range, against unprotected targets, the round was effective. Against targets with heavy clothing or behind light cover, its performance was less consistent than a full-power rifle cartridge. The Korean War complaints were not invented. Soldiers in winter combat genuinely experienced situations where the round did not perform as expected. The semi-automatic mechanism, while reliable under most conditions, was sensitive to certain types of dirt and fouling. Extended use in sandy or muddy environments could affect reliability. The Garand had similar issues, but the Garand's heavier construction gave it a slight edge in extreme fouling conditions. The maximum effective range of 200 to 300 yards was a real ceiling, not a theoretical one. At those distances, the weapon's accuracy remained acceptable, but the energy delivered was low enough that results became inconsistent. For any mission involving open country engagement, the carbine was the wrong choice. The M2 fully automatic variant introduced new problems. The 30-round magazine, combined with automatic fire, could drain ammunition very quickly. Without fire discipline, users burned through their load rapidly and were left in a poor position during extended engagements. The weapon also offered no meaningful armor penetration. Against even light vehicle armor or hardened field positions, it had no effect. For a secondary combatant in a support role, that was rarely relevant. For anyone attempting to use the carbine as a primary infantry weapon in high-intensity combat, it was a real limitation. These weaknesses were known, studied, and debated throughout its service life. They did not make the carbine a failure. They made it what it actually was, a specialized tool that worked extremely well within its designed purpose and struggled when pushed beyond it. Put the M1 Carbine beside the weapons it competed with for the same users, and the case for it becomes clear. The M1911 pistol was the primary alternative for support soldiers. It was powerful for a handgun, but its effective range was limited to roughly 50 meters in the hands of trained shooters, and considerably less for the average soldier under stress. It required significant practice to use well. The carbine outranged it, outgunned it at any distance, and was easier for minimally trained soldiers to hit with under pressure. The Thompson submachine gun was the other common comparison. The Thompson was a formidable weapon at close range, chambered in 45 CP, with a high rate of fire, but it was heavy over 10 pounds, loaded with a full drum magazine. It was expensive to manufacture, and it offered no meaningful range advantage over the M1 Carbine, which matched or exceeded it at distances beyond 50 meters while weighing roughly half as much. The M1 Garand is where the carbine is most unfairly judged. Critics who compare the two directly are comparing a secondary support weapon to a primary battle rifle. That comparison was never the point. The Garand was the right weapon for the frontline rifleman. The M1 Carbine was the right weapon for everyone behind him who still had to fight against foreign equivalents. The picture is interesting. The German MP40 submachine gun offered high rate of fire at close range, but used a pistol cartridge with similar or lesser range to the carbine. The British Sten was simpler and cheaper, but offered comparable capability. The Soviet PP's submachine gun family was excellent, but again pistol caliber. None of those weapons combined the carbine's balance of weight, range, firepower, accuracy, and ease of use quite the way the M1 did. Why it mattered beyond the battlefield is perhaps more important. The M1 Carbine proved, in 6 million examples, that a country facing an industrial war could design a weapon specifically for the realities of modern combined arms combat, not just for the rifleman, but for everyone in the fight. By 1945, the M1 Carbine was in the hands of American soldiers, Allied troops, resistance fighters, and foreign military forces across the world. When the war ended, the weapon did not quietly retire. Surplus, the M1 and M2 carbines were distributed to Allied nations through military assistance programs throughout the late 1940s and 1950s. France used them in Indochina. South Korea used them extensively. Israel used them in early conflicts. The Philippines, Greece, Turkey, and dozens of other nations carried them into their own conflicts. The M2 fully automatic variant saw significant use in Korea, where it remained in American hands until replaced gradually by newer weapon systems. Even after official American service phased the weapon out in favor of the M14 and later the M16, carbines remained in active military use worldwide for decades. In Vietnam, South Vietnamese Army units carried M1 and M2 carbines in significant numbers through much of the NPR conflict, a weapon designed for World War II, still fighting a Cold War proxy conflict 30 years later. The design also influenced thinking about what a military carbine should be. The concept of a lighter, handier weapon for non-primary combatants did not disappear with the M1. It evolved. The later development of the M4 carbine, the shortened M16 variant that today equips the majority of American ground forces, is a philosophical descendant of the same idea. Give soldiers who need to fight a weapon they can actually carry and use. The M1 carbine did not invent that concept, but it proved it at enormous scale under genuine combat conditions across 3 wars. Collectors value them highly today. Semi-automatic versions remain popular in civilian markets where legal. The weapon's design is still studied in military history and small arms development discussions. Soldiers who carried them frequently spoke of them with real affection, not as a compromise, but as a companion. That is not the reputation of a weapon that failed. That is the reputation of a weapon that delivered exactly what it promised, for longer than anyone expected. The M1 carbine was never supposed to be remarkable. It was designed to fill a gap, to give the radioman, the mortar crew, the officer, and the supply sergeant something better than a pistol and lighter than a rifle. It was meant to be a secondary weapon for secondary combatants, used in a single war and then replaced by something better. Instead, it became the most produced American firearm of the Second World War. It fought in 3 major conflicts across 3 decades. It armed militaries on 6 continents, and long after the rifles it was built alongside had been retired and forgotten, the M1 carbine was still in service somewhere in the world. That is what happens when a weapon is designed honestly, built for the actual problem, not the theoretical one. Built for the soldier carrying it, not the doctrine describing it. The tiny carbine outlasted every rifle it was meant to replace. Not because it was the most powerful, not because it was the most accurate, but because it was exactly right for the people who carried it, and exactly right turned out to be enough. If you found this documentary useful, consider subscribing. More military history, more detail, more truth about the weapons that shaped the modern world.